Yes, back on the show. Today's show is with my man Abdul Hameed.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, guys. And good evening to everyone.
Yes, good evening as well. Ask an Alim show. So this is basically where you guys can get a chance to ask an Alim or Imam or whatever you want to call him to any question about Islam, and hopefully he'll be able to answer you. Okay, the first question I want to ask you, right, is myself. Okay, I got asked. Well, I got cussed. Because I had a non-alcoholic drink in my hand, right?
Yeah.
Which was definitely non-alcoholic. It was a soft drink, but I got cussed by saying, "You're imitating the kafir." Can you give me some insight on that? Is that imitating? Are you kind of? Is that? You got?
Well, this is this Islamic understanding in regards to imitating other communities, where the Prophet says, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." This is as part of a hadith, and a hadith is a statement of the Prophet. And the problem with Muslims is that sometimes we accuse other people of decontextualizing Islam, and some Muslims end up doing the same thing themselves. This hadith was said in a particular context. It's a lengthy hadith, but part of that context Imam Nawawi also mentions in regards to copying people's beliefs, people's creed, people's understanding, and diluting your own theological position, being influenced by somebody else. That's the context of the hadith, but the hadith is also part of a whole different chapter altogether. Now, does that mean that if you're drinking a non-alcoholic drink, that's something wrong? Absolutely not. And I think some Muslims are just like, they have this kind of this image of what a Muslim should look like, and if you don't conform to that stereotypical viewpoint, then you just get attacked. And I deal with it too. But
your haircut.
It's going to go back and look like a werewolf right now.
Wolverine look.
Yeah.
You got attacked for having a dodgy haircut. They say.
I ride my motorbike. I'm doing my MMA. There's no such thing as all Muslims one size fits all, and this is how you're supposed to look. And then when people don't have an understanding of what the hadith or what Islam actually says about a position, it creates this double conundrum, and people are confused. Now, if you don't understand Islam, then go research. But then throwing accusations at other people, it's just way out of context.
Look, I love my. What should I say? I just love my clothes, and the thing is, right?
Showing off your clothes. I thought that said something.
It's like an old Adidas thing, it's trickle. Is that imitating the non-Muslims?
Of course not.
Of course not. Clothing's clothing at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tell them that, because that's what I got cussed for.
No, it's clothing. It can be absolutely. Like I said, this is more or less in terms of, like, for example, we respect Christians. Christians are our brothers in faith. But if, for example, during Sunday service of Eucharist, where people eat, for example, the wafer and drink the wine that represents Jesus' blood, and now me as a Muslim start doing the same practice, that would cause an issue, because I'm directly resembling another community's form of practice and worship, which Islamically we don't necessarily follow, and then that would be more of an issue. But it doesn't come in terms of your dressing, your clothing. Obviously, in terms of clothing, Islam has a basic requirement of covering your, what we call as an awra, or your satar, or your private parts, and that's more or less it. But beyond that, I think this idea of being diverse, being so, like, I would say, like, not only multicultural, but we have such a diversity of Islam that it's reached 1.7 billion. And we have some, and this kind of multiplicity should almost be kind of celebrated, as opposed to making people conform. Some Muslims think that if I act more Arab, then I'm more Islamic, which is not true either. So I'm just weird.
Okay, question for you. What happens if you want to leave Islam?
What happens if you want to leave Islam?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a really interesting question.
Say it slow, because you're quite fast like Speedy Gonzalez. It's like it's on speed.
I have so much to say.
Slow down.
I want to calm down.
Yes.
Right. This whole issue of apostasy in Islam. Now, I'm going to give you a brief understanding and explanation on it, and this is no wishy-washy. I'm trying to wool over somebody's eyes. For a detailed understanding, I'm going to post a link onto this on my page too, where there's an article that has been published in regards to this. I'll send you the link on the top of my head. But the idea that if somebody chooses to leave the faith, then that is their personal choice. Now, me as a Muslim, do I feel that that individual will be accountable and responsible? Absolutely, but that's to God. And whatever happens in the hereafter is between them and God. Now, if a person chooses to leave Islam, what becomes problematic is that there are sometimes some hadith, again, which has to be understood in a particular context, in light with the objectives of Islam and the Quranic principles. It's not just you nitpick a hadith, regardless of how strong its chain of narration is, and say, well, I found that in Bukhari and now it's just applicable. Not necessarily. And my mainstream normative understanding that I follow, and it's not my own interpretation, is that if somebody chooses to leave the faith of Islam, I will try my best to convince them that Islam is the truth. But then we have autonomy and agency, and we have this idea of volition, and a person can choose to. Should that person be harmed? Absolutely not.
They say there's no compulsion in religion.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
That means you're not forced, or you're not forced into religion. If you want to leave, it's up to you. There's no compulsion. That means you
But
make
I
your
would
mind
be,
up
like I
and
said, I would try my best to convince the person and try to look in, because sometimes people are exposed to Islam in a very negative way, and it's very easy to be exposed in a negative way too.
Of course,
and they have a lack of understanding. And so I think these issues have to be theologically discussed, as opposed to just marginalizing people from the community and so-called putting people to death and thinking doing God a favor. It's the biggest disservice you can ever do.
Yeah. Shaykh Khan, wa alaikum salam. Dale, yes, bro. You're back in Iraq. That's how they say. They don't say Iraq, they say Iraq. You're back in Iraq. Hope you're safe, bro. I have Muslim friends who drink. Is that a big problem?
Sorry, I was reading my question.
Oh, do you want to read your question first? Then?
No. Somebody's asking on my Facebook what topics. We're discussing any social issues. If you guys want to pop in any questions, on also on my page, I'm looking at the top.
Your arms look bigger than mine on that.
Damn. Be humble.
I have Muslim friends who drink. Is that a big problem? It's from Brett Liming.
But Islamically, it is not permissible for Muslims to drink. Does that mean you will find Muslims who drink? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, even if you look at the Old Testament, he actually prohibits drinking too, which I know some Christians sometimes question whether it's applicable to them or not. But it is not permissible for a Muslim to drink. Now, a Muslim shouldn't lie, but you find some Muslims who do lie.
Yeah.
They just are
Muslims
not very
good
practicing Muslims. And
yeah.
Again, my job would be there to try to kind of figure out, you're doing something which is prohibited. Let's figure out, I can support you and help you. But it's something which is prohibited within our faith.
Okay, this one's a bit of a controversial one.
Let's go.
Okay. Do you think the two Muslim men who got married a couple of weeks ago is helping to break down barriers?
Okay, this is a really good question. The two Muslim men that got married, I think Daily Mail covered
it.
It
wasn't two. It was one
Muslim
guy,
and he married a
guy.
white English person. I think the Muslim guy was, I think Bengali was 19 years old.
No, the white guy was 19. He was 23, I believe.
Okay, something like that.
Yeah.
But before I answer that, I have done a video on my Facebook page. You can catch it on Shaykh Abdul Hameed. I'll put a link on this too. Can you be gay and Muslim? And I done but like a 4 or 5 minute video after the gay pride discussing some of these issues. Now, in Islam, premarital sex and extramarital sex is forbidden with the same gender or opposite gender. Dude, trying to discuss important issues. I don't mind sweets here too. Yeah, so premarital sex, extramarital sex is forbidden with the same gender or opposite gender. It is not permissible. That's the Islamic stance behind it. You'll find no scholar who tries to make any of these issues permissible. Now, because that the institution of marriage is something which is so sacred that Islam only recognizes it through male-female, then we believe this marriage would not be counted in Islam. So therefore, this whole idea of a nikah for us will not be, in a sense, legitimized or recognized as a marriage. Now, does this help break down stereotypes? Well, maybe it can help people deal with the idea of homophobia. Maybe, absolutely. Do I wish harm upon them? Absolutely not. Do I agree with them thinking that it's an Islamic marriage? For me, it's just when you try to make...
It wasn't an Islamic marriage. It was just
No, but on the Daily Mail headline, I saw the thing. It was a Muslim marriage. And
but it didn't do it in the mosque, did they? It wasn't no Imam.
Yeah.
It was a civil marriage. It was one of those ones.
Civil marriage, like I said, you can marry who you want. But Islamically, that particular marriage wouldn't be recognized. But should these people be harmed or in any way cause any form of discomfort? Absolutely not. And again, discuss with them, understand their viewpoints. But Islam wouldn't recognize that marriage as a marriage. And we should be open to say that. But like I said, it doesn't make me homophobic or anyone else homophobic. It's just that's the Islamic position behind it.
Okay, question for you. How come this Imam, supports Abu Layth, who says tattoos are allowed in Islam?
Oh.
I asked this Imam, does he allow tattoos? Do you think tattoos are allowed in Islam?
Well, first of all, Mufti Abu Layth is a good friend of mine, as a personal friend of mine. Do I agree with his theological positions? Absolutely not. And we sit and discuss for 2-3 hours on end. Last time I went there about 10 o'clock and came back 10 o'clock in the morning, 12 hours straight, went crazy. Do I agree with all of his viewpoints? Absolutely not. And my mainstream understanding is that tattoos in Islam are not permissible because of a strong hadith that prohibits men and women from having tattoos. But if that's his position, then that's his position. And if he can substantiate it, then that's his viewpoint. But I highly disagree with him.
Okay, so tattoos are not permissible in
No,
Islam.
it's not, no.
So I can't have a big, massive, let's see tattoos too.
No. We can do that henna thing, that fake one.
I did henna before, but it only lasts 2 weeks. Then it goes away.
Thank
okay,
God.
another question for you. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum. Just wondering, which school of thought do you follow?
Me?
Yeah.
So-
Me, I follow all four.
Do you?
Yeah, I'm a Salafi.
Okay. Me personally, I follow the Hanafi school of thought, broadly speaking. And even within the Hanafi school of thought, sometimes there are a spectrum of opinions. And sometimes other schools of opinions can have more stronger viewpoints. I won't get too nitty gritty. But there's a really good book for those who study Arabic. It's called Tuhfatul Ahwadi, which is an explanation of a book of hadith called Tirmidhi. And they look for all four schools of thought and try to understand the different viewpoints. But broadly speaking, I follow the Hanafi school of thought.
Okay. Talk about books. I'm reading this book at the moment. Chavs. It's
That's
quite a good
really
book. It's quite good.
Owen Jones.
Oh yeah, Owen Jones. Sorry, that's who wrote it. I know some of you don't like him, but the book is really good. How he demonised the working
Hardcore
classes.
socialist.
Yes. Okay. Okay. This is an odd one here. Mark Barker. What is your opinion regarding the reason for millions of migrants moving into Europe? Millions of migrants. Okay, migrants. There's loads of migrants. Which ones? From Africa? From where? From. What's your opinion regarding that?
There can be an emigrant and an immigrant. What are some of the reasons why they are coming? Again, let's understand the full context of the situation. Regions were destabilized. This by no means am I justifying terrorism. Terrorism is just absolutely insane, whether it's done by so-called Muslims or whether it's done by people of faith or no faith. The whole of Iraq more or less was destabilized on a false premise of accusing a dictator of having weapons of mass destruction. I mean, you've been seeing some of the reports that have been published, the Chilcock inquiry, which was more or less saying that Tony Blair lied and went for illegal war. What's happened in Iraq, the vacuum that was caused as a result, you saw extremist groups such as ISIS come about, which is absolutely crazy. Now, even if you see in Syria, that was a result of the Arab Spring in 2011 when the region was, again, going through a lot of issues. And most of these issues are socio-economical, conflated with like geopolitical situations and circumstances that caused some of these issues. And some countries have some very aggressive foreign policies that results. I mean, I've met a lot of Syrians who would rather be in their home country than actually having to migrate here. What do I feel about them? I think there are people who need support. But how can Europe cope with such a huge influx of migrants, the biggest migration since the Second World War? It will strain resources, and I can also appreciate how people may feel in regards to such a huge influx of migrants. So, I mean, it's an interesting one.
It is. Oh, the cat's done one again. I told my daughter to throw the cat out, and guess what he goes and does? I just knew it.
Kept in the house.
Yeah, done number 2, innit?
Oh my god.
Yeah, he done
I
last
thought that was you. I smell.
Oh. Okay, you answer the next
Nothing.
question. I think us Muslims are too busy pointing the finger before looking in the mirror and fixing our own house before others.
I absolutely agree. I think we also as a Muslim community need to figure out what's happening in our situation, and like the Quran says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. That God doesn't change a state of a community or a nation until individuals start changing themselves. And I totally agree with that idea, that we as a community have to be more introspective and look into what we can do in helping the current situation. Are we responsible? Absolutely not. Do we all contribute to the issues that we are facing? Yes, as citizens of the UK. But I think as a community we can do more.
That's one of your questions.
Right, let me go through your questions. There's some people are saying, shall I go from the top?
So that's
a lot of questions.
I'm back. I'm back.
Give us a lot of questions.
Sorry, I'm back.
Not it.
Oh, that cat killed it. Phew.
Man.
Oh. Okay, what are your thoughts on stereotypes against Muslims at the moment? For instance, I was at Fort Park recently and a Muslim school trip turned up. And I can hear many people start, oh, there goes my day, going to get blown up on the rides. How can we move past this just because a few radicals that ruin it for the rest of us, rest of those who wish to follow this religion?
You have to understand is that one of the reasons why, I'm not saying this is the exclusive sole reason, but one of the reasons why sometimes some Muslims are driven towards being radicalized by people like Anjem Chaudhry and all of these weirdos is that they don't feel comfortable or accepted enough sometimes part of mainstream community, where I know a lot of my students who sometimes wear hijab and cover their hair, and young Muslims will think twice before going to a particular area. And these are young 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And when they go to a community and people are so Islamophobic against them, man, it puts you off. It creates that us versus them kind of narrative. And the same thing can happen where somebody who's white who comes to a Muslim, like a predominantly Muslim Asian area, and they start getting that person. So I think we have to break down the stereotypes. But like I said, the more you start telling young Muslims that they're not really British or part of the UK, the more it's the same narrative that the Islamist extremists have, who try reinforcing this negative stereotype by telling you, well, you have more affinity and attachment to those who are being killed abroad by the foreign policy of this country than you have towards the citizens of this country. And people get radicalized. You see those 3 people who are found guilty of trying to create that half pipe bomb that they created, and which is absolutely insane. You see that news?
No, I didn't see
yeah,
that.
3 people, 3 young people. These are guys in their 20s. It's insane, absolutely insane.
Young kids.
Yeah, I think we need to do much more to help some of these young lost
Okay,
weirdos.
Imran Hussein says the problem we have is people have different opinions, especially from. Can't drink.
You filled that full.
Yeah, we're doing half it. The problem we have. Sorry, you just spilled water over himself. Like you weed yourself. Do you want some tissue?
That'll be good.
First of all, the cat does number 2.
Number 1.
Then he wets himself. Okay. The problem we have is people have different opinions, especially from different branches of today's Muslim society.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. The problem we have is people have different opinions, especially from different branches of today's Muslim society. It's difficult being around in an era where people would not foot around the wider society. Foot around? I don't know. It's FOT, F-O-T. How can we deal with this? i.e. cultural difficulties and the broader people who blindly follow so-called Islamic cults?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a double-edged sword where it cuts it into a situation where we can, in some extent, celebrate the diversity of the UK population, but at the same time, it can create some barriers and issues where, because Islam is so diverse and there can be a spectrum of opinions and issues, that it can sometimes cause people to have different mindsets and interpretations and approaches of what we think is most conducive living in the UK, being Muslim. And sometimes for me, these parts of my identity are not necessarily clashing, but they are inextricably linked to one another. How I would deal with the situation, I think the Islamic scholars and the Imams really need to step up. And they need to look at the current situation, what's called in social sciences ethnography, the customs, the normative traditions of a community and a society, and try to explain to the people how Islam should be practiced and is relevant in the society that they're living in. And Imams do need to stand up and really take control of the mantle and start changing our communities, because a lot of people are lost, honestly.
Yeah,
and these are absolutely confusing times. I mean, I've studied like crazy Islamic theology and secular studies and degrees, and even I'm like trying to make sense out of the crazy world, let alone everyone else and the young people who are 12, 13. But yeah, I think we have to also get to know each other. I know it sounds cliche and cheesy. We have to get to know each other. We need to break down this kind of stereotypes. Stop looking at people through this kind of prism of narrative of, oh, he's a Muslim, he's a non-Muslim, or they're white, or I'm black. Try to get in touch with people's humanity, realizing that we are human beings like the rest of us. There's an Islamic interesting statement by Ali radiallahu anh, where he says that a man is either your brother in faith or your equal in society.
Oh, that's nice.
And when we start seeing each other in that same kind of mindset, that mind frame, it will break down some of those negative stereotypes that we have.
Good.
Garcia, David, saying salam alaikum salam. He should be joining us, man.
I'll tell him to come on the show. Come now Dawood, come now if you want. You can have banter. Okay, Stephen Webb says salam. Wa salam. Terry Butler. I don't have a version, but Riaz Khan is top man. Nice one, thank you very much. Phil, hi Riaz. Hi Phil, how you doing? What's your point, Shukil? Oh, so that's about immigration. They're having a bit of a ding dong. Yeah. Who's going to win the Premier League?
No, not for the football.
That's going to be a tough one. We've got some good teams out there now.
Somebody asked about... Okay, should just get the Mayweather-McGregor thing out of the way.
Go on, let's get it out of the way.
Okay. Everyone thinks that Mayweather's going to win 49-0. He's got an insane record. I think he's one of the greatest boxers...
Some spice of fix though, come on.
...of this generation. Insane, slick defense.
Some spice of fix.
That
come on,
finish
referees
that
are
he
on the
has.
side, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean,
it's all about money.
He dealt with Canelo, who was, again, Canelo was coming into his prime. He's made a ton of money. He's such a smart... To be top of the game for about, 21 years or so is insane. And that's what he's been able to achieve. But in MMA is very different to boxing. But I know this is a boxing fight. McGregor has a puncher's chance. And he's such an unorthodox fighter that he sometimes can probably attack Mayweather at angles that he may not be used to as a conventional. I think Paulie Malignaggi was sparring McGregor, and he was talking about how unconventional and unorthodox McGregor was. But my point is, Mayweather most likely is going to win, but I do think McGregor has a chance. I don't think this is as one-sided.
McGregor's a brawler.
Yeah, and it's Irish.
Brawler, yeah.
Exactly, he's going to come forward.
Okay, should Norway change the bus decor to avoid future confusion for fight?
Oh yeah, did you see that?
Yeah, I was posting on Facebook.
So we're just laughing at something.
Should Norway change the bus decor to avoid future confusion for right-wing idiots?
So there was this story in Norway where it was posted on social media like crazy. I also posted this on my Twitter. Where there was an empty bus, and someone took a picture and said all of these Muslims are coming over and taking over our country because they thought that women who are veiled were sitting on that bus, but it's actually an empty bus, and it went kind of crazy and they got picked up. I think sometimes people are literally blinded by their own bigotry.
From Kashan, right? The far right always raise the issue of the Prophet's wife's age. Can you demystify that for the non-Muslim?
This is a really good question. I mean, you're really going to know? Like, it's going to be short.
It's going to be a long one, but I know she wasn't 6 and she wasn't 9. And she was in her late teens.
Talking about Mufti Abdul, again, a good friend of mine. I can post all these links, man. I'm going to post them on my page. There's a detailed discussion in regards to suggest theologically that she was 18 years old. Yeah. And Mufti Abdul has done a detailed discussion. You can go on YouTube, type in Aisha, age of Aisha, Mufti Abdul, and he done about a long, detailed 2-hour discussion theologically going and substantiating and explaining how she was actually 18 years old when she married the Prophet. Does Islam in any way allow any form of pedophilia? Absolutely not. In Islam, it's something which is not permitted.
That's the one thing I want to ask you. A lot of the far right always say, well, you know about these grooming gangs. Well, it's in their books. It's allowed. They're allowed to rape children. What the hell? That's just insane. Please, can you just explain to the audience? Because
I'm sure you watched that documentary 3 on BBC with those 3 girls, right? It was absolutely insane. And all of these paedophile sex rings, whether it's in Rochdale and something was in Oxford that I was reading about, these are absolutely abhorrent, repulsive, absolutely insane people. Man, if I got my hands on these people,
I'd knock them out.
I would.
I would do more than that.
Honestly. Not that we're encouraging violence.
No.
Actually, we are. No, we're not. But this is absolutely insane.
Against them, it's different.
Do they speak for Islam or represent Islam? Absolutely not. And these people have to be dealt with severely. And all of the authorities that somehow try to cover their tracks, they all are guilty and tacitly approved when young people, especially young girls, are being harmed in such a way. It's just does Islam encourage this at all? No, it's just insane. How can Islam encourage any form of abusing little girls or abusing anyone, let alone the most marginalized, disadvantaged people? These people, I honestly think their actions would merit them to go to hell, and God will judge them, but hope they get a severe punishment in this world too.
Yeah, so
absolutely sickening.
Made me sick because they give us a bad name. There's no doubt about it.
Bad name. Look at those young people whose life they may not even be able to recover psychologically from the issues that they've had to deal with, and these guys just come out from prison and act like nothing's happened. Man, it's insane.
Okay. This is from Abs Church. He's just posted something up. I'm going to ask a question. Purely for reference and to get good questions in, please can ask the Imam briefly explain the Islamic rules on interest and usury.
Okay, this is another interesting one in Islam. In the Old Testament, the same ruling that applies to the Muslims in our final Quranic testament is that usually the idea of interest is forbidden within Islam. Now, obviously it makes it very difficult for a Muslim now to kind of live in the West when you're having mortgages and student loans and trying to open up a business, and how would you operate and deal with it. Some scholars have looked at some of these verses, and like you have like Islamic mortgages and finances, and trying to find the loophole through it of how people can sometimes own a home. Some scholars like Shaykh who I disagree with, has given the fatwa that it would be permitted for somebody to buy their primary house as a necessity. So there are a spectrum of opinions. Sheikh Akram Nadwi has an interesting discussion in regards to comparing the conventional mortgage to an Islamic mortgage and whether there's a difference or not. But more or less, it's an issue. Interest is forbidden within the Quran, and the Quran is explicit in regards to that. Now, how we interpret those verses and see how it's applicable in the West, again, there's a spectrum of opinions that you can research and you can go through.
Okay. Why does anyone listen to Chowdhury, who he is an evil man?
Why does anybody listen to him?
Yeah, I think
my problem is that why on earth did BBC give him such
Because it sells.
And like I said, the
Controversy,
media,
yeah.
as usual, have to have somebody who's just absolutely insane, who give some
Maybe
people like this
we should act
platform.
insane.
I mean, they actually give, and all of his followers, you know, on Netflix, whilst I'm watching Suits, I was watching this documentary. You know those
Suits, what's that?
Suits, Harvey Specter, man.
Yeah,
It's very cool.
I watch Iron Fist, Daredevil.
I didn't watch that.
You know,
I watched this insane documentary about
Luke Cage.
on National Geographic about Einstein's life.
Okay, he was in that job anyway.
Yeah, he was insanely intelligent.
He was though.
What the heck was this thing? I was saying something.
Why is anyone listening to Chowdhury?
Yeah. So there was a documentary on Netflix that I was saying about. I think it's called The Jihadi Next Door. If you watch it on Netflix, he just, you know, what's that? The guy with Abu Halima, that guy with the humongous Santa beard, and the kind of crap they're talking about. Man, these people are so. That Islamically, they have no understanding,
no knowledge.
And when I'm discussing, I've met people with that kind of mindset. When I'm sitting down and asking the most basic questions, they cannot even theologically refute some of my position. So they'll just say, "Oh, you're just a sellout scholar," or "You're a scholar dollar," or they just like dismiss you as an individual and attack you personally instead of theologically discussing your viewpoints. Sometimes these are converts too. And sometimes, you know, they try to feel more part of the community and being over enthusiastic, get brainwashed by these stupid weirdos. And then these guys say, well, everyone else is not really a Muslim if you don't kind of come to our understanding. And that person who, you know, those 3 people who killed innocent people in London with a machete, he was part of the same group.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
These people we should stop the oxygen from where these people operate. They should not be given any opportunity to even discuss. They're a threat to society, as is the far right nationalists.
What's the view on Muslims boxing as a sport?
Well, that's a really good one. So, what's the viewpoint on? If you check my page, I was just last night training. What's the Islamic position about boxing? I think boxing is absolutely the hadith. What creates the issue is that the statement of the Prophet says that don't hit the face out of respect because God's created this in a particular way. But at the same time, we have to understand the context of this. That Islam still encourages you to learn to defend yourself and engage in active sports. The Messenger of God was a physically fit individual, and therefore, if somebody wishes to box and spar and you're wearing a head guard, I don't think so. There's a problem with that. I personally compete in MMA.
What about boxing? As a sport, as in like for
you
money?
Want to take it up professionally?
Yeah, as money. As for money.
And I know some scholars would really be against the idea in statement of the hadith. Me personally, I wouldn't necessarily say it's haram. I would say necessarily it would classically discouraged. But I think people like Amir Khan are doing an amazing job. Muhammad Ali, right? Yeah. Not only was he a representative of one of the greatest boxers in history, but what he stood for as a social rights activist and how he represented the black community and equality and in Islam. And I think sports. I think our community needs to engage more in sports. I don't think there's a problem with that.
I've just got some Starburst in my mouth. Excuse me. Why do some Muslims believe non-believers should be killed and then some Muslims don't believe they should be killed?
Okay. Do Muslims believe non-Muslims should be killed? No. Okay. Does Islam teach that non-Muslims should be killed? Absolutely not. You know, just the way you get weirdos in every community, right? You can be a Christian and have some extreme, like when I was in America in Texas, there's evangelical kind of Christians, really kind of fringe community, or burning Qurans. And do all Christians believe in that kind of stuff? No. The stupid weirdo Muslims who believe that every non-Muslim is a potential target is a threat to all of us. These people don't even value Muslims, let alone non-Muslims. If you disagree with them, they'll class you as a non-Muslim and say, well, you should be also killed. And there was an early sect in Islam who are called the Khawarij. You probably hear this term quite often, maybe from Islamic scholars and in the media, who are an extremist group that came very close when the Prophet had passed away. And they actually classed some of the caliphs of Islam, namely Ali radiallahu anh, as a non-Muslim for not conforming to their extremist viewpoints. And this is the same extremist ideology. In fact, the Quran warns against extremism. وَلَا تَغْلُوا فِي دِينِكُمْ. God even says, don't go to extremes in your religion. The Prophet also chastised his companions not to go to extremes theologically with this faith because it creates problems. So I think these people are disconnected from mainstream normative Islam. They have a really messed up understanding. Me personally as a psychologist, I would go back into their kind of upbringing, trying to understanding their mindset, why they feel the way they feel. Some of them had some really negative experiences in their past. They didn't feel part of the community for some strange reason, and they have this kind of really negative, and some of them are brainwashed and radicalized online, looking at some of these ISIS videos. But is that the Islamic position? Absolutely not. And like I said, I'm not trying to give some kind of wishy-washy taqiyya kind of thing that I'm trying to do here. It is not permissible for a Muslim to hate. Remember, every companion of the Prophet was a non-Muslim who converted to Islam. If the Prophet hated non-Muslims, then Islam would not have spread.
Absolutely.
And is it my objective back of my mind to spread Islam and spread Sharia law? No, it's not. Honestly, for me, it's about us living a good life, our children having opportunities and having a better future. If somebody wants to talk about Islam, absolutely, we can talk all day. Do I wish for other people to share my faith? Well, yes, because I believe that it's a beautiful way of life. You can disagree with that, and you can be a faith or no faith. You have every right, and that's the Islamic position behind this.
Okay, love hearing you guys talk. This is how I want to see Islam. Keep it up. Best wish from the Scandinavian atheist.
Oh wow,
Sacha Remling. Nice one, Sacha. Okay, Imam Sacha. Is Sacha? Sacha. No, it's not S. I don't know how you pronounce it. Okay, anyway. Imams and Alims spend their lives studying the Quran. How has Mr. Robinson wrote a book so quickly? Have you heard about this?
Yeah, the Muhammad's Quran.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon. You know, Tommy Robinson's an interesting individual.
Yeah, but he divides communities and unites communities.
Yeah, for me personally, obviously, I know I feel annoyed and frustrated by the hate that he spews. But for me, I have to like break it down analytically and psychologically. And why is he saying the stuff he's saying? I highly disagree with some of the way he goes about doing stuff. But some of the points that he's raising, I think to some extent have to be addressed. So, for example, if he's talking against grooming gangs, if he's talking against some extremist imams, well, not really imams who claim to be imam. Like, I can wake up tomorrow morning, say I'm an imam, and have a bunch of weirdos who want to follow me and create a death cult, who are inciting hatred, need to be dealt with. I think the spread of extremism inside the prisons is also an issue. So he is raising some important problems that are in our community. But for him to kind of associate all of these kind of social crimes to Islam, and to suggest that this is an Islamic issue because Islam is encouraging this kind of issues. Yeah, he just alienates and marginalizes people like me who kind of understand where he's coming from. But like I said, he's an antagonistic kind of individual who wants to provoke people.
The thing is, right, he talks about Muslim grooming gangs, but there's also white grooming gangs. He doesn't mention it. It's like you say, it's wrong for Muslim grooming gangs, but it's okay for white grooming gangs. Because he doesn't speak out against them neither. So he's dividing communities, he's not uniting communities. That's the problem I have with him. Okay, he brings up issues that we all need to deal with.
If you saw his interview with Piers Morgan, right, on I think a month ago or something, that he had, and he was flashing the Quran and saying that this book encourages violence and stuff. You know, I absolutely honest with you guys, there's a verse of the Quran, for me, when I read this, it shook me to my core. In Surah Baqarah, God says, يُذِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. With this book, God can misguide people, and with the same book, people can be misguided. Because you have a misunderstanding, decontextualized from what he's trying to say. And sometimes Muslims can do that. So if ISIS, for example, are using Islam to justify their barbaric acts, well, we need to theologically challenge them. My personal viewpoint, me personally, and again, I'm not having a go at anyone else, but I'm kind of tired of those cheesy platitudes. Every time there's a terrorist attack and we don't have to say, if you kill one life, it's like killing the whole of humanity, which is true. But what the heck are we doing to deal and challenge these people in terms of they're using Islam to justify their actions? And we have to theologically use that same. There's a really interesting book called Refuting ISIS by Shaykh Yaqubi. You can buy it on Amazon.
I bought it.
Yes, it's a really, and he theologically breaks down all of the arguments. Some of the Ibn Taymiyyah understanding of how he interprets particular verses, they have to be broken down and then explained to the young people.
Okay. Glad you're here. Excellent program. Salam, Huzaifa. Do you feel culture has taken over true Islam?
You know, again, try to give you more of a balanced understanding. You have some people who say there's no culture and Islam should be two separate things, which is not exactly true. Now, Islam is a set of practices, beliefs, creed that we have to subscribe to and believe and practice every aspect of our life. Does that mean that it has to be divorced from culture? Absolutely not. Now, if your culture is clashing with the Islamic position or Islamic understanding on a particular given situation, then preference should be given to Islam over culture. And I'll give you an example. Say for example, you see Malaysian Islam, you see Pakistani Muslims, you'll see Indonesian Muslims, you'll see British Muslims, American Muslims, Turkish Muslims. And when I visit these countries, I just love the multicultural kind of approach to Islam. Now, we all believe in the basic tenets of this faith, which are called the usul, the principles of this faith. Now, how they go on to practice what's called the furu, like the peripheral issues within our faith, are open to interpretation because there are a spectrum of opinions according to the scholars that they follow. Now, if those, like I said, do I believe that every Muslim woman should dress in black, for example, and cover her face? No. Because...
Is that cultural, do you think?
For me personally, I believe that... I would say a woman has a right to cover her face if she wants to or not, that's her choice. But for her to think that it's something that it's an obligation within the religion, no. The head covering is not the same ruling as the face covering. Head covering in the Quran is substantiated and consensus of the scholars that it is mandatory. But if there's a threat to your life, then there is some concession not to wear it in a particular given situation. So there are concessions within our faith too. But that's not the same ruling. Like if a Muslim woman, for example, wants to just dress in black and thinking this is more Islamic, then, well, that's more or less a cultural kind of Arab understanding of their approach to Islam.
Yeah.
Which I don't necessarily believe that that's normative mainstream Islam. But if that's how they want to practice it, that's their choice. So I don't think culture and Islam are two necessarily separate things. But when culture clashes with Islam, then sometimes we have to give more preference to Islam.
Problem, yeah. Okay, I've got a question here. Islamically, a shaheed is alive. So why do we do a funeral prayer of a shaheed when we only know the janazah of a dead person?
Okay, let me explain this question for a non-Muslim audience. Somebody's saying, we believe in Islam, and I'm going to get to this martyr situation. We believe in Islam, a martyr is not necessarily dead, that they're still alive in the hereafter, because the Quran and the verse is, بَلْ أَحْيَانَ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. They're in the presence of the God, being sustained. Now, what this means here, and people use, there's two situations here. People use verses like this to glorify terrorism. To say that if I was to go and kill somebody, I'm a martyr and I'm going to get 72 virgins again, which is an absolute absurdity.
Yeah.
When people take weak hadith, with chain of transmission, which is totally questionable, out of context, to go and justify, if I go kill random people, then I'm going to go in paradise and chill with these virgins.
No chance.
Most likely going to end up going to hell.
Most likely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because of harming other people for no reason.
Yeah.
Now, when somebody dies a physical death, then we believe that a rites of passage, that they're given a Muslim funeral, and therefore they will be catered for and looked after. But this verse is referring to a metaphysical kind of, almost like the hereafter is beyond time and space. So them being alive in the presence of God, how that is, we don't necessarily know, because it's the realm of the hereafter. But we do believe they're in the presence of God being sustained. But because they die a physical death, that's why we do the janazah.
Cool. Okay. Question from Sonia. What is being done to help women within the UK living a secluded life due to extreme and strict beliefs? Meaning some women have never left their neighbourhood, don't speak English, have no friends outside their religion, don't understand their rights within the UK as a woman.
Again, that's a really interesting question. Was it Sonia?
Yeah.
Sonia asked a good question about women who sometimes feel suppressed. Again, first of all, there's nothing to do with Islam that says keep your women locked up and don't give them any freedom.
Damn. So I can't lock my wife up.
His missus just went to martial arts right now.
Yeah, no, she'll kick my backside.
That is not the Islamic position. Now, what the problem is that some cultures are very regressive. And what they do is, because they come from... Cultures, yeah. And because they come from this kind of tribal mentality, where they have this kind of sexist approach, and their relationships are very questionable with the women folk, where they think it's all about power and control, where the guy can go out and do whatever he wants, and the women are expected to be like domestic doormats, then this is nothing to do with Islam, and it's a huge cultural issue. Should these women be locked up and sent to prison and not being able to socialize? I think it's a form of abuse, emotional abuse, social abuse.
It is.
Sometimes people even suffer from domestic violence and physical abuse. I think we need to do much more to help women, and this is not something which is just exclusive for cultural women who happen to be Muslim. This happens in other communities and societies too. We do need to do more to empower women who feel marginalized. And it's not permissible in Islam to treat your women folk. The Prophet says in a hadith, in a statement, he says that be good towards your women folk, for I am the best to my wife. And he's saying that to his companions and to the rest of the Muslims. Outside people can praise you. You can have 100,000 Facebook followers. But if your own women folk or your own family members don't hold you in the same esteem, then you're more or less worthless.
Yeah.
You're just kind of deluding yourself.
Yeah, I can tell you about that because in our culture, in Afghani culture, Pathan culture, when Alexander the Great came over, he came through our region. He brought this culture in where the women were secluded. Because that's the ancient Greeks used to have their women secluded in certain parts. They weren't allowed to socialise or secluded. Some women put onto the island of Lesbos, where they do martial arts and train and stuff. That culture came to our region. And some people adapt that culture within our region as well, where they keep the women secluded, they're not allowed to go out in public. Thinking when they do go out, they have to cover up properly, like the full blue burqa.
I also think
I think it's mainly cultural.
For those who are more or less more learned with Islam, they'll probably say, well, what does the Quran say about this? There were some statements which were said exclusively to the wives of the Prophet. وَقَرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ, where God is telling them to be in their home for a particular reason, because some of the hypocrites in society were trying to cause harm to the wives of the Prophet. This was like the royal family. And there was some security measures that were put up for them in place to support and help them. But is this more or less the approach to Muslim women? Absolutely. I was reading about Malala Yousaf, her biography, an absolutely inspirational. I think she won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, she did.
The Bachelorette. Amazing young girl. And she was talking about her tribal system where her father was trying to help young women being educated, and the Taliban were causing such havoc and menace in society, thinking that we shouldn't allow girls to educate themselves, and the Taliban were using Islam to suggest it's impermissible. No religion on the face of this earth has ever started with encouraging literacy. Islam started with the words Iqra, read. For them to suggest that to educate yourself is un-Islamic is just such an absurd idea.
Do you know the Prophet's wife Aisha was the biggest scholar? The Sahaba used to go to her, ask her for,
this was
and information.
A young woman who contributed 1/3 of Islamic jurisprudence to Islam. She was a senior teacher. Jurisprudence meaning Islamic law and what's forbidden and what's allowed and permissible and impermissible. She was a teacher of some of the senior companions, including the likes of Abu Hurairah, was a prolific narrator of the statements of the Prophet. To suggest that women, there's a scholar in Oxford, his name is Shaykh Akram Nadwi. He's compiled a book called Muhaddithat, the female narrators of hadith, and he goes into the biographies to explain in detail how women and female scholarship has contributed vastly in our history to our understanding of Islam that we have now. So for people to suggest, honestly, I think it's such a retarded, absurd approach.
It's culture. It's all boils down to culture. That's all it is.
It is absolutely
male dominance and culture. That's what it is.
Shocking.
Okay. Another question from Stuart Adam. So how can more progressive Muslims and Islamic commentators and the rest of us help untangle the whole cultural and religious complication that's at the heart of a lot of it, be it Rochdale, terrorism, etc., etc.?
I'm going to speak from my own experiences as an Imam, is that we have to be comfortable enough to be able to discuss some of these issues. For example, when this whole idea of jihad and the idea of terrorism, Imams felt uncomfortable discussing jihad in the masjid because thinking there must be an informant somewhere here who's going to decontextualize what the Imam is trying to explain to counter that wrong narrative of jihad, to prevent and to rescue these people. And Imams did not feel comfortable discussing some of these issues. So all of this went underground, and then you had the kind of fringe Muslims like Anwar Chaudhry and his people who kind of capitalized through social media and through the internet to radicalize some people. I think the Imams, I go through a whole bunch of problems. The Imams need to step up, like I said previously. They really need to just get up and deal with the situation, educate themselves not only in theology but also in secular studies to be able to be conducive and relevant to their society, being able to guide the masses. Communities need to invest in paying Imams a decent wage, not just some peanut. My friend was saying that if you pay peanuts, you attract monkeys. Now, when you pay a scholar, I had Milton Keynes. This is I'm not trying to sound big-headed, but I studied a fair amount of detail. I studied 6 years of Islam, 12 hours a day, and then I studied 2 degrees. Somebody phones me up, and I'm traveling, giving speeches and stuff, that we need a Imam in Milton Keynes. So okay, they headhunted me. They're like, we're gonna offer, this is no joke, we're gonna offer you 12,500 and you're gonna live on top of the mosque.
The whole year?
Yeah. I thought he was joking, so I was laughing, and he's like, no, I'm serious.
What the hell?
I was so frustrated and annoyed. Oh my god, I went all out. Like, how the heck, if you're gonna attract those kind of people, how are you gonna guide the masses? right? And I think that as Muslim community, instead of investing so much in buildings and creating a mosque in every corner of every street, invest in people.
Which causes friction.
Yeah, invest in people. Honestly, invest in people. Invest in your imams. And I think we also need to pool our money to creating more social projects that we can pool in together as a community to see, right, we live in, for example, Edmonton. What do we need as a society, regardless of faith, that we can actually chip in? We need a social
halal
center.
McDonald's.
We need this.
Sorry.
We got Maryland around the corner.
Fairyland. Need a halal McDonald's, that's the one, number one.
You know
Big
what?
Mac.
It's
halal.
so unhealthy. I'm glad it's haram, man. Seriously.
Yeah, once in
Man, watch
a blue
those
moon.
documentaries about the stuff
I know,
there.
it's not good for
It's
you. Once in a
insane.
blue moon, with a nice big milkshake.
Yeah, milkshake's nice.
Yeah.
Not for everything.
Okay, another question I was going to ask you, it's gone out the top of my head now.
Oh, we have my author here, Riaz, watching. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Salaam, good. Okay, another question was, subhanAllah, I forgot now, it's gone out of my head. What's your opinion on prevent? Because you mentioned prevent. You mentioned it, so I'm going to ask you.
So now the government's going to be after me and the Muslim community is going to kick me out.
Just as it is, doesn't matter.
My personal viewpoint, I think terrorism and extremism is a legit issue in our community and it has to be dealt with. Now, initially, I think the way Prevent dealt with this issue early in 2004 and 5 and setting up a ring of cameras, especially in Birmingham, and spying on communities was such a bad way of dealing with it that they're not been able to recover from that negative press ever since. They've just lost trust within the community. But what alternative is there? Honestly, what alternative is there? I think it's about time, almost a decade has passed in the Muslim community, if we are as concerned, we should be able to pool our resources together and find an alternative agency or approach to dealing with extremism at a national level. I think spying on Muslims doesn't help, but I know some Muslims, some terrorists who happen to be Muslims who are justifying Islam need surveillance because they are causing harm, like these three weirdos who, you know, this guy, the three people, he actually had engraved kafir on a blade, non-Muslim on a grave, on a blade, on a machete, and wanted to actually behead people, and they had constructed half a pipe bomb.
Can I just tell you about one of the persons was teaching young Muslim kids, and he butchered a poor Australian woman. I mean, he butchered her so badly that they couldn't recognise her. And this guy was teaching kids.
Absolutely
How can a guy who teach kids go and do something so barbaric as that? What is in their head?
It's absolutely insane.
I don't get it.
It's shocking, honestly. I think if Prevent was to work, I think they need more civic kind of engagement from the Muslim community. If Muslims have
people like yourself to take the reins and say, right, we're going to do it this way, this way, this way.
If Muslims have grievances, they need to come to the table and suggest alternatives and try to deal with some of these situations. But there's so much suspicion and conspiracy involved, that there's so much distrust that's created as a result, that I think a lot of Muslims feel alienated by Prevent currently. But more has to be done to deal with extremism.
Okay, another question. I'm most interested in the whole culture, region versus Islam issue. Non-Muslims, racist or not, tend to ascribe harmful views towards Islam, which are nothing to do with religious text or teaching.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be an important part of an information strategy, which maybe isn't covered in Prevent or Protect or whatever they're called.
Absolutely. And like I said, in the media, when somebody commits a crime, they'll be identified by the religion. And a Muslim extremist or a Muslim happens to this, and then you just vilify you tarnish a whole community. 3.5 million, 4% of the UK population, by making us feel that we're responsible for this. We are not some kind of monolithic community that we just in perfect sync, that when somebody says jump, we say how high. We disagree within our own communities, and we are not responsible for each other. We can speak against each other, and you know, when somebody is doing abhorrent acts, and we should try to help and guide them. Am I responsible for them? Absolutely not. But for me to absolve my responsibility, it doesn't deal with the situation either. And I think we have to change our approach. I think we shouldn't ascribe a particular person's crime to their faith. If it happens to be inspired by Islam, theologically, we need to look into why he's understanding, what is the reason for this. And a lot of the psychological problems I've dealt with young people when I'm talking to them who have been radicalized or being radicalized, sometimes they come from broken families, sometimes they come from socioeconomically impoverished, sometimes they're uneducated, but still you'll find the odd people who are educated who end up joining ISIS.
Yeah, that's lack of. They might be educated, but that's lack
in
of
the Western,
Islamic
but the
knowledge.
Islamic interpretation will be so warped.
Yeah.
And I've met a lot of these, I'm picking on engineers, but a lot of these engineers who happen to be from Arab countries who sometimes think that because they speak Arabic and because they've gained a master's degree or something, all of a sudden they know everything in Islam, and they have some real messed up understanding, and they mix up nationalism. So, for example, there can be an issue of Palestine, for example, and I'm really opening kind of worms here, but I, as a Muslim, can have a genuine grievance with how Palestinians are being treated. Now, does that mean that I am now going to be anti-Semitic? Absolutely not. And we have to kind of understand that nuanced approach. Every Christian is not a crusader, every Hindu is not a Tamil tiger, every Jew is not a Zionist, and every Muslim is not a terrorist. And when you start kind of blurring these lines, we alienate a lot of people.
Okay. How do I explain to a non-Muslim why it is we feel the need to believe in Allah?
I missed that, so I'm reading that.
How do I... I'm on reading, not you.
Okay, read.
Okay, that's my job.
Go for it. Sorry, I apologize.
How do I explain to a non-Muslim why it is we feel the need to believe in God or Allah?
Okay, how would you explain to a non-Muslim the need to believe in Allah? For me personally, again, I don't like shove my opinion down somebody's throat, but if you want to sit down over some coffee and discuss why I believe in God, just randomly, I was watching this movie last night. It's called The Crisis of Christ. It's a new movie that just come out. The Crisis of Christ. Where this is a real story where there was a young pastor who was an absolute atheist, and his missus, and then he kind of got in touch with the religion and go through his whole life, which was interesting. For me personally, I would just come to understanding the kind of teleological arguments that how can everything come into existence from nothing? Somebody or something or being has to be responsible for this. And I know this whole story of Big Bang and evolution, but who's responsible for creating that kind of atmosphere which was there in this first place? And there has to be a designer, because everything has been such perfectly orchestrated and designed, who's sustaining everything that exists. For it to come about by absolute chance and for it to be random is, for me, I can't necessarily digest, which makes me point towards, okay, there must be somebody's responsible. So now from an atheist or an agnostic, then you have to figure out, okay, which religion am I supposed to go through? And I went through this crisis myself. There's a video on my page that I done my crisis of faith. And my mother converted to Islam, and I come from a very diverse family. And I had to go through that crisis to understand what made Islam more true than anyone. And I feel comfortable with my faith now.
Okay. What are the Islamic views on celebrating independence of so-called Islamic countries from one...
Did you read it yourself now?
Oh. What are the Islamic views on celebrating independence of so-called Islamic countries from the one Ummah?
I mean, for Muslim countries to celebrate independence, I don't think it's got anything to do with Islam. It's got to do with the history of colonization, most likely Britain, that's responsible for. I mean, I'm on my school holiday, so I think I'm watching too many movies. But I watched this other movie that is called Mountbatten, the Viceroy's House. It's a new movie, just came out.
Okay,
I came about it 7 months ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, it's this kind of Hollywood approach to kind of wishy-washy facts and marginalizing a lot of what actually happened. But for Muslim countries, for my first view, for them to celebrate independence, I don't think there's any problem with it. The idea of us being one nation and one ummah, okay, what makes us one ummah, what makes us a community, if you look at the definition, is something that you have in common with other people. Now, what we have in common is our faith. But if you have to geographically be born in a location and you are celebrating the independence historically of your country, I don't think so that necessarily clashes with your Islam. And I think the two are separate.
Okay, Tracy says, I'm not being funny, but it's always about Muslims. Any person, no matter race or colour, can teach any kid anything. It's about time it all stopped. Okay. Muslims shouldn't have to be doing this sort of thing like Riaz is doing. I find it rather upsetting, to be honest. She basically said, why should we keep justifying who we are and justifying our identity and trying to tell non-Muslims that we're not violent? And
yeah,
she finds it upsetting.
And somebody also said to me, why is it always Muslims who are causing all the problems? When was the last time any other faith's, majority of another faith's country was illegally occupied and invaded? And it happens to be Muslims in Iraq whose whole region has been destabilized. And Rabbi said, if you have to read history, and a lot of people have this kind of goldfish kind of approach and a memory that they think that terrorism only started with 9/11. It did not. Read history. Look at what happened previously.
9/11, look. Sorry to interrupt you, but 9/11 was an inside job.
Okay, I don't personally believe that.
I do.
I personally don't believe that. That's his viewpoint.
The evidence points to it was an inside job.
No, I don't know. I don't think so.
Anyway, that's another story. I'll get someone in for that. Go on, carry on, sorry.
We're saying something.
About 9/11 caused all
Yeah,
the
so I
problems.
think a lot of these issues happen historically. That for me, when I'm going back in history, I don't think so. The Muslim world was able to recover post World War One, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the colony, no, the empire was kind of cut up. If you look in the year 1917, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where literally Sykes-Picot, French and British politicians, on a map with a ruler and pen, carved up the Middle East. Jordan, you got the issues of Lebanon, you got the whole region of what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and then they have no understanding of the ethnography or the tribal alliances or the diversity of the community, and said you belong there. Just the way they done in India when they left earlier than scheduled, and just divided the country randomly through India and Pakistan. And West
So
Pakistan,
Burundi as well.
left Kashmir in a mess,
Burundi, all
Palestine
those
still in a mess.
Yeah.
So these issues are not necessarily just started about from now. A lot of Muslim majority countries have legit grievances with what's happened historically. Now, how we're going to deal with those issues, God knows. But there's more to the problem than what meets the eye, more than what's happening being reported in the news. And we have to really educate ourselves. It doesn't justify terrorism, like I said.
A few more minutes left, right? Angie says, there shouldn't but big respect to them for taking the time to educate us all. I love these videos. I love to learn about other religions and cultures. It's the spice of life.
Absolutely. I me as a Muslim, I'm actually going out traveling. And I visit temples.
On a motorbike.
Yeah, Che Guevara, go through it, Latin America. I visit temples, I visit Gurdwaras, and a big up to our Sikh community, who I work very closely with. An amazing community. And I go to the Christian churches and I go to the synagogues. And when I was also in Jerusalem, I was next to the Holy Sepulchre. In my eye line, there was the Western Wailing Wall. On my left was the Masjid al-Aqsa, the most holy, third holiest building in Islam. And that's the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And I'm just sitting there, just thinking. And you could almost feel the negativity or the friction or the hostility.
Really?
I've been there 6-7 times, but sometimes if you go into the wrong areas at the wrong times, especially when there's a lot of tension like there is now. And a thought came into my head. I thought, we all claim to believe in the same God. Would that God want us to hate each other in His name? And if that's the case, then what kind of religion is that? And it really made me question my understanding on faith. That you don't have to necessarily be a Muslim to be a good person or follow a religion to have morals. But the idea that if you happen to follow a tradition, then all religions call towards being a better moral individual. And if you're not doing that, then there's a problem with you as an individual.
I find it odd that people say Islam is about praying, giving to charity, having a big beard, wearing a thobe, but they don't be good to their neighbours, or whether they're not good, they're not kind to animals, or they're not kind to their friends, or they're not kind to their own family members, for example, like wives and kids. So
absolutely.
What's the point of being a Muslim?
And I was explaining this vertical and horizontal relationship. If I don't pray, that's between me and God. If I don't go for pilgrimage, that's between me and God. God can forgive me or punish me. If I'm usurping and infringing other people's rights, God won't forgive me until this individual has forgiven me.
Yeah.
If I'm not giving my children the right, my neighbor my right, my community my right, my country their right, then I feel Islamically we're responsible.
Okay. Welcome Lewis Connolly, Falkirk's FC's media frontman. Okay, I don't know what that means. Stuart Adam, no idea.
We just got a comment there, Zubair Umarji. Jazakallah, my brother, for that kind of comment.
Salams, I don't know this Shaykh personally. This bling bling, there was a shop in town. Just plugged your shop there. You better give me a discount, you type leader. Anyway, but one thing is lectures always seem to make sense, are humble and always easy to understand. These are the kind of Sheikhs we need for today's youth. Absolutely. Spot on.
Thank you.
Last one now before we go, because it's an hour, the hour's nearly up. Let me think of a question.
All questions done?
I think so, yeah. Sometimes my phone goes a bit dodgy, I can't.
You guys have any questions?
I think that's about it. You want to add anything to before we go?
Let me find
These oak was lovely.
I haven't had a single one yet. I'm just eating them all. I'll take a few for the road. Right, let me quickly dispel some myths, yeah? As a Muslim, I believe that I have a duty to be the most practicing ethical human being that I can be. Now, my faith helps me and allows me to do that. Does that mean that my identity clashes with being British? No. Should I feel uncomfortable? Absolutely not. Should we be patriotic? Yes. Does that mean that I have to agree with the foreign policy of this country? No. And it's my democratic to voice my opinion. 1 million people marched against Iraq. And me
More than a
personally,
million.
I know a lot of people can disagree with me,
There's
but
2 million, probably more. To be
I
honest.
do
I
feel
was there.
sometimes inclined towards Jeremy Corbyn's approach to looking at some of these issues of why we have so much dysfunction in our communities and societies. And I think a Muslim, as Muslims, there needs to be more civic engagement in order for us to contribute to the wider society. I think a lot of Muslims are doing so much good work that is not being recognized, but we do it for the sake of God. There's a beautiful verse that I love when I read the Quran, where God says, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. God says that those who are really humble, they do good charitable acts and feed those who are impoverished for God's sake, and they don't expect recompense and reward from human beings. And even though we do so much and we're not given that kind of spotlight that we should, because how much we contribute, the Muslim community is the largest contributor for charitable causes than any other faith within the UK. Just in Ramadan we end up raising millions, and you can go and research this. There's an article about this in The Guardian. But there are people who try to use Islam to justify their vilified acts and to think this is Islamic, and they're not only doing a disservice to Britain, to the community, to us as Muslims. I believe these people will be responsible to God on the Day of Judgment. I also believe, like I said, that people who are harming other people, I also don't believe that a Middle Eastern life is worth less than a European life. When somebody dies in Europe, and I know we should mark our respect and have a vigil, but millions of people died in other parts of the world too. And when an individual life is lost, irrespective of your color, race, faith, religion, sexuality, persuasion, political affiliation, when people are being innocently killed, we all stand up together in humanity and speak against abhorrent acts of terrorism and violence. And that's my Islamic understanding of this.
Great. Okay, it's been over an hour now, so we have to log off now. Thank you for listening. I'll have him on again in a couple of weeks' time when he's not so busy, because he's always riding on his motorbike, so we're probably going to do some martial arts. I'm going to visit a place of worship. I'm supposed to go there as well.
Come, 8:30.
I think he's 66, isn't it? I feel tired, man.
You guys, I need to give my own plug-in. Like my page, Shaykh Abdul Hameed. I've tried to tag into his page, it's just not working for some strange reason. But like my page, if you have any, let me say this, if you have any Islamic questions that you would like to ask, if you're Muslim, non-Muslim, I don't care, ask away. Directly page, you can add me on Snapchat, CageRage01, that's my fighting name, CageRage01. You can directly snap me a question on Facebook. You can directly ask me any Islamic questions you want, and I'll try my best to answer.
Or you can listen in 3 weeks' time for him to come again. That's the best one, because that's live and direct.
You guys, thank you so much. Have an excellent evening, and may God's peace and blessing be upon all of you.
Thank you for listening. Hope to see you soon. Salams.